Okay, in this lesson we're going to look at how to describe IELTS tables. Okay, we'll look at the language for tables. Now some tables might be over time, but some may not be, so this affects the language you can use. So for example, if we look at this first table, this has a time frame from 1990 to 2005. So you might say, for example, in 1990 Africa had 749 million hectares of forest. However, in 2005 this had fallen to 691. But we can also use the language of comparing and contrasting. So for example, South America had the largest forest area at 946 million hectares. However, this next table is not over time, so you can see there's no time frame. So all you can do with this graph, you can't use a language of change, but you can obviously compare and contrast things using, for example, superlative adjectives. So for example, Bangladesh had the lowest GMP per head, while the USA had the highest. So when you're analysing tables, there are certain things you should do, as with all graphs and charts. You shouldn't describe every single piece of data presented, just to present the main points of each feature. You might not be able to describe everything anyway, because there might be too much there. However, you should make sure you mention each feature. So for example, if there are 4 countries, you should mention all 4 of them, even if you say very little about one, because there's not much information. Look for important data. So for example, look for things like the highest and the lowest, particularly the highest, because these might be important things to describe. Also, you must try and group the data. This might require you to use some general knowledge about the world, such as recognizing developed and developing countries, because you might want to group the data according to some of the features that are there on the table. So let's look at some key questions you need to ask yourself when you answer IELTS Task 1, for example, a table. So here we have the prompt. So the following table gives statistics about the aspects of quality of life in 5 countries. So it's this table we're looking at. So what is the table measuring? So this is looking at the quality of life in 5 countries. So you can get information from the prompt, but you also want to look at the table as well to see what else is there. So obviously it's looking at GMP, calorie supply per head, daily calorie supply, life expectancy, infant mortality. So you need to carefully analyse the prompt and the table to see what you're actually going to be looking at. So what type of language do you need to use? Change, comparing and contrasting. So we looked at this already. This is the second table and there is nothing over time, so you can't use language of change. So you'll just be comparing and contrasting things, using things such as adjectives or while, however. What tense would you use? We'll look for dates. You can see this is in 1982, so you'll be using past tenses. Usually mostly the past simple, because you're talking about completed actions in the past. Which country has the best quality of life and which has the worst? So in this case you can see Bangladesh has only 140 US dollars per head. USA, however, is much higher at 13,160. If we look at the other indicators, you can see Bangladesh is much worse. USA is by far the highest. So look for these kind of things. And you can see if we look at Bolivia, Egypt and Indonesia, they're kind of in the middle and they're a bit more similar to each other. So these are kind of things you want to look out for when you analyse your table. So you can start to spot sort of different patterns. So what information could you use for an overview or conclusion? Because remember, every task 1 needs to have an overview. So there's several probably choices you could have, but for this one, a possibility is to look at the USA. You can see that's much better quality of life than the other countries. So this could be something you could point out as an overview. So how could you group the information? So we've looked at this a bit already. We could do it by country. There are normally various choices or a few choices you can make, but one way to do this is if you look at the countries, we have Bangladesh with the lowest quality of life, Bolivia, Egypt and Indonesia a bit more similar in the middle, and then USA much, much higher. So these are possible ways to group the information. How many paragraphs would you have, and what would you write about in each one? Well, this is connected to the previous points about grouping information. So for example, Bangladesh, Bolivia, Egypt and Indonesia and the USA. So you could group the information in that way. So grouping in the information means that is the way you'll organise your body paragraphs, and it will lead to a much more coherent response. So if you have time, you could make a quick plan, but this goes through the kind of things we looked at. So you identify the topic, which is a standard of living in 5 countries. The languages of comparison, not change. It's in 1982, so you'll be using the past. As an overview, you could say USA is far higher. For grouping the information, USA was the best quality of life. Egypt, Indonesia and Bolivia are a bit more similar in the middle, and Bangladesh was very low. So let's look at a model answer. So first we'll look at an introduction and the overview. So here we can see the table uses 4 economic indicators to show the standard of living in 5 selected countries in 1982. So this is your introduction. Now this information you can get from the prompt, but remember you must paraphrase it, don't copy it. And then the overview. Overall it can be seen that the quality of life in the USA was far higher than the other 4 countries. So it's picked out a main point of the table. Body paragraph 1. So remember we were going to group the information by USA, then the 3 Bolivia, Egypt, Indonesia and Bangladesh. So first we're discussing the USA. So to begin, the USA, which is a developed country, had the highest GMP at $13,160 per head. It also had a much higher daily calorie intake and life expectancy, and the lowest rate of infant mortality at only 12 per 1,000 live births. So you can see the language of comparison in there. Body paragraph 2, we're looking at the next 3. It does start with a topic sentence mentioning all 4. Quality of life was much lower for the other 4 countries. So the indicators for Egypt, Indonesia and Bolivia were fairly similar, with their GMP ranging from 570 to 690 and daily calories in the 2000s. Life expectancy was also almost the same, although Bolivia had a much worse infant mortality at 124 per 1,000. So some of that was described sort of together because they're quite similar. However, the infant mortality is much worse in Bolivia, so that's pointed out. So it is important to point out if there are any sort of discrepancies. But you'll see we're always making comparisons throughout the graph, throughout the table. So body paragraph 3, we're talking about Bangladesh. So Bangladesh had by far the lowest quality of life in all the indicators. Its GMP per head was approximately 1% of the USA's. Its calorie intake and life expectancy were about half those of the USA, and its infant mortality was 11 times greater. So here we have the whole answer. So you can note how it's organised very well. It's got an introduction, overview. The information is grouped into 3 different body paragraphs, and it uses language to compare. So it's comparing all the way out the different countries. So don't forget to check out our best-selling Task 1 writing ebook, which is on the IELTS Buddy website. It's packed full of all the different graphs and tables you can get. It's got exercises and sample answers. The link's in the description below, and you can link to it from the video as well.